A story that rivals the drama of Ocean's 11 or the Thomas Crown Affair, a real-life caper. I've never used that word in a sentence before. It's known as the Bonded Vault Heist, one of the biggest yet least known robberies in U.S. history. 41 years ago this week, on August 14th of 75, 8 men broke into nearly 150 safe deposit boxes. The crew took off with duffel bags full of money, gold, silver, jewels, and more. At the time, police valued the take around $3 or $4 million. Turns out it was more like 30 million, the equivalent of 120 to 140 million by today's standards, making it the largest single payday in Northeast criminal history. The story is the subject of a great new book. It's called The Last Good Heist. It was co-written by former Providence Journal writers Wayne Worcester and Randall Richard, along with WPRI investigative reporter Tim White, whose father, Jack White, covered the case for the Journal as well. Tim, it's great to meet you. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Jim. Buy 100 for your closest friends.
The theft essentially got the sign-off of Raymond Patriarca, who's everybody's heard of, obviously the biggest crime
Former
boss in
mob
Ringo.
boss.
That's not so surprising. Tell people who the victims of this theft were.
The victims were his soldiers and associates. So that was one of the problems with why it was so hard to pin down what the value of it was. It hovered around $4 million for a long time, and that's because police had trouble getting victims here. You had bad guys who stole a bunch of loot. They're not going to call the cops and say, hey, you know all that stuff I stole? It just got robbed from me.
So explain why the mob boss signs off on a hit on mob members. I mean, what was that about?
According to some of the people that pulled off the robbery, it was sanctioned by the mob boss because he was spending time in federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia for a gangland slaying that he was convicted of. And while he was down there, he felt that his soldiers weren't paying their dues. He wanted to come back and teach them a lesson. So when this was offered to him, he approved it.
And there was so much stuff. The eight guys, right?
8.
The 8 guys, they didn't know what was in these, how much was in these safe deposits.
No idea.
There was so much, they didn't even have enough carrying stuff to haul away all the zillions of dollars in these safe deposit boxes.
You brought up Ocean's 11. Let me just make it clear, this was not Ocean's 11. These were not the brightest guys on the planet. As a matter of fact, they only had targeted 4 safe deposit boxes that they knew they had to hit because they felt it would have the most value. But when they were able to get into 148 of them, that's when they realized what exactly the treasure that they had stumbled
And people are
upon.
sitting at home saying, how did they get into 148 safe deposit boxes at some bank? Well, the answer is it wasn't some bank, correct?
And it wasn't just safe deposit boxes. So when we think safe deposit boxes, you think Citizens Bank and those little these were massive 2 foot by 2 foot. I held a door. They're very heavy steel doors.
Where were they?
They were in the heart of a fur storage building in downtown Providence, and it was little known. People didn't know that this, quote unquote bank existed, and it didn't have a sophisticated alarm system because it didn't need one.
Because nobody's going to
Who's going to rob from the mob? That's right.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you have, as I mentioned in the beginning, a genetic connection to this. Is that true?
I do.
What'd your father do around this thing?
My late father, Jack White, was an investigative reporter for the Providence Journal at the time, and he actually reported on this story. And I've made this joke a couple of times. As a kid, I was fascinated by these stories. Normal kids got, Casey at bat. I got stories of Casey hit with the bat, right? This was my favorite organized crime story there was, and when he passed away in 2005, I wanted to see it through as a book and got together with 2 great journalists to make it happen.
I can't believe I laughed at that lame joke. It
gets everyone every time.
Since we're on your father, just as a diversion for a minute,
yeah.
Your father's question is responsible for arguably one of the great political moments ever, actually, with Richard Nixon. We happen to have it here. You'll remember this. Here's President Nixon.
I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
And there's relevance to today, even
Sure
though
is.
that was, 43 years ago or some such thing, or maybe more, whatever
1973
Right.
was when you heard that. My father had just broken a story that Nixon dramatically underpaid his taxes, and it really struck a chord, I would say, with blue-collar America at the time. And he was questioned about that story. The first part of that quote, by the way, Jim, is, "I want to congratulate you, sir, and your lively staff," which I'm not sure is
that
honest.
is great. Oh, I didn't know that. I love that.
But that is why we ask for tax returns today of our candidates.
Well, that's why I'm proud to say both of our candidates have released them so willingly. It's terrific.
Yes, so it was very
What
easy.
happened to the 8 guys who, back to this, what happened to these 8 guys?
One of them, the lead gunman, a guy from Lowell, Massachusetts, named Robert Dussault, when they realized they weren't going to get the vast majority of the loot because it went back into the crime family, he started to get a little antsy. The mob put a hit out on his life, so he did what a lot of people do when that happens, and he decided to cooperate with the government. And that's launched the longest and most expensive trial in Rhode Island history. Some people were convicted. 2 of the 8 gunmen or 8 robbers did cooperate with the government, and some of them are dead.
We only have a minute left. You've spent a lot of your life covering this underside of the world. Is it a fair statement to say that the mob world is still relatively healthy in your state, Rhode Island, and relatively unhealthy in mine? Is that a fair
I don't think it is.
Well, tell me what is.
Well, I think organized crime in general in the Northeast and New England is a shell of what it once was, particularly when you look at this. This is an important piece of that history. If you ask law enforcement now, whatever's left of La Cosa Nostra in New England is actually headquartered out of Boston, but it's in disarray. So I don't think it's healthy anywhere right now. And, you don't hear about a lot of membership, new blood coming into the organization. And frankly, it was caught on a wiretap. I'm not saying this. They don't want the headache of having law enforcement breathing down their neck all the time.
Tim's great books. Great to meet you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks so much for your time.
Okay.
Appreciate it.